I was 26 years old when I met Janelle Rhodes. Back then, neither of us had anything that would impress the world. No luxury cars, no impressive bank accounts, no family money waiting to rescue us. Just two exhausted people trying to build a future that seemed permanently out of reach. I first saw her at a small neighborhood coffee shop on a rainy Thursday evening. The place was nearly empty. A storm pounded against the windows. The barista looked half asleep, and Janelle was sitting alone at a corner table fighting with a laptop that clearly wanted to die. I noticed her because she kept muttering at the screen. Then she sighed loudly, closed her eyes, and said, "If this thing crashes one more time, I'm throwing it into traffic." I laughed. She looked up. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she laughed too. That was how it started. Not with fireworks, not with destiny. Just two broke people sharing a joke on a rainy evening. 3 hours later, the coffee shop was closing, and somehow we were still talking. About everything. Dreams. Failures. Families. Fears. The future. When I finally walked her to her car, I discovered it was even older than mine. The driver's door wouldn't close properly. The bumper was held together with duct tape. She looked embarrassed. I smiled. "My car has a window that won't roll up." She laughed. Then we're basically millionaires. Neither of us knew how ironic those words would eventually become. Over the next 2 years, we became inseparable. Life wasn't glamorous. Far from it. Most weekends were spent figuring out how to stretch money until the next paycheck. We celebrated promotions with takeout pizza, birthdays with homemade dinners, anniversaries with long walks because they were free. But we were happy. Genuinely happy. When I proposed, I didn't have enough money for the ring I originally wanted. I spent months saving, taking extra shifts, skipping lunches, working weekends. Eventually, I bought the best ring I could afford. It wasn't enormous. It wasn't flashy. But when I got down on one knee, tears instantly filled Janelle's eyes. "Yes," she whispered before I could even finish asking. Then she threw her arms around me, and for a moment I honestly believed nothing could ever separate us. We got married 6 months later. The ceremony was small, less than 50 guests, a modest venue. Simple decorations, no luxury, no extravagance, but it felt perfect. At least it did to me. There was only one thing that surprised me: the prenup. A month before the wedding, Janelle asked if we could sign one. At first I was confused. Neither of us owned anything. We were both carrying student loans. The idea seemed ridiculous. "What exactly are we protecting?" I asked jokingly. "Our debt?" She laughed. "I know it sounds silly. Then why do it?" "My parents want it." That answer immediately irritated me. Her parents had always been difficult, particularly her father. Harold Sutton believed everyone had hidden motives. Everyone, including me. He never openly disliked me, but he never fully trusted me either. According to him, prenups were simply common sense, even for people who had nothing. I remember sitting in a lawyer's office staring at a stack of documents. The attorney explained various clauses. Most sounded completely irrelevant. Asset protection, future inheritance, property division, financial obligations. None of it seemed important because we had virtually no assets. After 2 hours, I stopped paying attention. Janelle looked bored too. Eventually we signed. We left. And neither of us thought about that document ever again. At least not for many years. Marriage wasn't easy. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. There were arguments, stress, unexpected expenses, medical bills, job uncertainty, moments when we wondered how we'd make rent. But we always found a way. Together. When I lost my job during an economic downturn, Janelle worked extra shifts. When her mother got sick, I drove her to every appointment. When my father passed away, she held me together during the darkest months of my life. That's why what happened later hurt so much. Because she wasn't just my wife. She was my teammate, my best friend. The person I trusted more than anyone. Or at least I thought she was. 7 years into our marriage, we were finally beginning to see progress. Nothing dramatic. Just small victories. A slightly larger apartment. A better car. Some savings. The possibility of buying a home someday. One Friday evening, Janelle stopped at a gas station while driving home from work. When she walked into our apartment, she waved something in the air. A lottery ticket. I laughed. You planning to become a billionaire? Why not? You have better odds of getting struck by lightning. She dropped onto the couch. Someone has to win. Then she tucked the ticket into her purse and forgot about it. So did I. 3 days later, everything changed. I was cooking dinner when I heard a scream. Not a normal scream. A terrified scream. I ran into the living room. Janelle was staring at her phone. Her face had gone completely white. For a second I thought someone had died. Janelle? She couldn't speak. What's wrong? Still nothing. Then she slowly handed me the phone. The winning lottery numbers filled the screen. I looked down at the ticket in her shaking hand. Then back at the phone. Then back at the ticket. Again. And again. And again. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. No. That was all I managed to say. No. Janelle started crying. We won. I stared at her. We won. The room felt unreal. Like a dream. Like a hallucination. Like somehow reality had broken. The jackpot amount appeared beneath the numbers. $150 million. I sat down because my legs suddenly stopped working. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Then we laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. For hours we talked about possibilities. Paying off debts. Helping family. Traveling. Starting businesses. Building the future we'd always dreamed about. At 3 in the morning, Janelle rested her head against my shoulder. No matter what happens, she said softly. What? We're stayers. I smiled. Of course. No matter how much money there is. I kissed her forehead. We're stayers. At the time, I believed those words. Every single one. Unfortunately, money doesn't just change bank accounts. It changes people. And sometimes it reveals who they really are. The news spread faster than wildfire. Within days, relatives began calling. Friends appeared out of nowhere. People we hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. But nobody reacted more strongly than Janelle's family. Harold Sutton arrived at our apartment carrying an expensive bottle of champagne. Lorraine arrived with luxury real estate brochures. Trevor arrived with investment ideas. For the first time in years, they seemed genuinely excited to see me. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, I realized they weren't excited to see me. They were excited to see the money. And over the following weeks, something began to happen. Something subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Every conversation started excluding me. Every decision happened without me. Every discussion about the future suddenly centered around Janelle. Not us. Her. One evening I walked into the kitchen and heard Harold speaking quietly. He didn't know I was standing nearby. Now that you've won, your life has changed. Janelle didn't answer. You need to think carefully about who belongs in that future. A long silence followed. Then I heard something that sent a chill through my chest. Janelle didn't defend me. She simply said, I know. And for the first time since we had won the lottery, I felt a fear that no amount of money could erase. Because standing in that kitchen doorway, listening to the silence that followed, I realized something was beginning to change. And I had no idea how far it would go. The first few weeks after the lottery win felt like a dream. The kind of dream people spend their entire lives imagining. Lawyers. Financial advisors. Interviews. Meetings. Investment opportunities. Every day seemed to bring another possibility, another door opening, another version of the future. At first, Janelle and I navigated it together, or at least we tried to. We sat through consultations, reviewed financial plans, discussed long-term goals, talked about helping our families, buying a home, creating security for generations. But little by little something shifted. And the shift always seemed to happen whenever her family was around. Harold became increasingly involved. At first it was advice, then recommendations, then instructions. Soon he wasn't merely offering opinions. He was making decisions. And strangely, Janelle was allowing it. One afternoon, I arrived home from work and discovered that Janelle had already placed an offer on a mansion, without discussing it with me. When she showed me the photos, I nearly dropped my phone. The property looked like a private resort. Massive white columns, 3 stories, a circular driveway, palm trees, an enormous pool. Luxury beyond anything I had ever imagined. It's beautiful, I admitted. But why didn't we talk about it first? Her smile faded slightly. It happened quickly. It still affects both of us. Janelle looked away. It's just a house. No, it wasn't. It was the first major decision she'd made without me, and unfortunately it wouldn't be the last. A month later, we moved in. The mansion became the center of everything. Parties, gatherings, family dinners, business meetings, luxury events. Every weekend the place was filled with people, most of whom I barely knew. The bigger the house became, the smaller I felt inside it. Harold acted like he owned the property. Lorraine constantly criticized my appearance, my clothes, my career, my hobbies. Nothing seemed good enough anymore. Trevor was worse. Much worse. He openly mocked me. At first it was disguised as humor. Then the insults became impossible to ignore. One evening during a family dinner, he raised a glass and laughed. Let's be honest. Everyone looked toward him. If Janelle hadn't won, Malcolm would still be driving that old junk car. A few people laughed. I didn't. Neither did Janelle. I waited for her to say something. Anything. Instead, she looked down at her plate. That hurt more than Trevor's words, because silence can be louder than insults. Over the following months, the distance between us grew. Conversations became shorter. Date nights disappeared. We stopped eating breakfast together. Stopped watching movies together. Stopped sharing our thoughts. Every time I tried discussing it, Janelle became defensive. You're imagining things. I'm not. You're insecure. No, I'm concerned. Concerned about what? I stared at her. Our marriage. For a moment I thought I saw guilt flash across her face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by irritation. The woman who once held my hand through every struggle was becoming someone I barely recognized. Then came the day everything collapsed. The day shown in the thumbnail. The day I realized my marriage was already over. It happened on a bright Saturday afternoon. The sky was clear. The sun reflected off the mansion's enormous windows. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. I had spent the morning meeting with an investment consultant downtown. When I returned, something felt wrong immediately. Cars lined the driveway. Luxury SUVs. Sports cars. Sedans. Far more vehicles than usual. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed people gathered near the front entrance. A lot of people. Relatives. Family friends. Neighbors. At least a dozen. Maybe more. Some were whispering. Others were staring directly at me. A strange knot formed in my stomach. I walked toward the house, confused, uneasy. Then I saw it, a black suitcase. My suitcase, sitting beside the front steps. For a moment my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. Then Harold stepped forward. His face was cold, emotionless, deliberate. Behind him stood Lorraine, Trevor, several relatives, and beside them stood Janelle, wearing a stunning red dress, her arms crossed tightly, expression unreadable. My heart began pounding. I looked at her, then at the suitcase, then back at her. What's going on? Nobody answered immediately. The silence felt unbearable. Finally, Harold pointed directly at me. The gesture was sharp, accusing, like I was some kind of criminal. You need to leave. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. What? You heard me. I stared at Janelle. Surely she would stop this. Surely she would explain. Instead, she looked away. That hurt more than anything. Janelle? Nothing. I stepped closer. Tell me what's happening. Finally, she spoke. Her voice sounded distant, almost rehearsed. We need space. Space. We've grown apart. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Since when? Another silence. Trevor smirked. One of the relatives pulled out a phone and began recording. My humiliation had become entertainment.com. The realization made me sick. Harold stepped forward again. Take your things and go. My chest tightened. You're throwing me out of my own home? Our home? Trevor laughed. That's funny. Several people chuckled. I looked around, searching desperately for someone. Anyone. Who thought this was wrong? But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody helped. Then I looked back at Janelle. The woman I had loved for years. The woman who once promised we would face everything together. The woman who had cried tears of joy when I proposed. The woman who had promised money would never change us. And she simply stood there, arms crossed, silent. Choosing them, not me. Them. A tear escaped before I could stop it. I hated that it happened. Hated that they saw it. but I couldn't control it, because in that moment, something inside me shattered. The mansion behind them wasn't just a building. It represented every dream we'd built together, every sacrifice, every late-night conversation, every plan for the future. And now they were erasing me from it. Harold pointed toward the gate. "You don't belong here anymore." The words hit harder than a punch. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then I slowly reached for the suitcase handle, the same suitcase I'd used years earlier when Janelle and I took our first vacation together. The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked at her one final time. Part of me hoped she'd stop this. Run toward me. Tell everyone they were insane. Tell them she loved me. Tell them her marriage mattered. Instead, she remained motionless. And that was my answer. I turned around, walked toward the gate, and left. Behind me, I heard whispers, laughter, conversations, the sounds of people continuing their lives, as if they hadn't just destroyed mine. That night, I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like old carpet and stale air. The mattress sagged. The television barely worked. The bathroom light flickered. A year earlier, I would have considered the place depressing. Now it was all I had. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The lottery was supposed to improve our lives. Instead, it had destroyed them. Hours passed. Darkness settled outside. I barely moved. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Something made me answer. "Hello?" A calm male voice responded. "Mr. Rhodes?" "Yes. My name is Graham Mercer." I frowned. "Who is this?" There was a brief pause. Then he said something that instantly got my attention. "I'm calling regarding your prenuptial agreement." My heart skipped a beat. "The prenup?" "Yes." Another pause. "There's something inside that document you need to know." I sat upright immediately. "What are you talking about?" The attorney's voice remained calmer. "Mr. Rhodes, I strongly suggest we meet tomorrow morning." My stomach tightened. "Why?" The next sentence changed everything. "Because if what I've discovered is correct, your wife and her family may have made a very expensive mistake." The next morning, I arrived at Graham Mercer's office with zero expectations. Honestly, I assumed he was calling about paperwork. Maybe divorce procedures. Maybe legal formalities. Maybe some forgotten detail buried inside a document neither Janelle nor I had looked at for years. I certainly wasn't expecting hope. After what happened outside that mansion, hope felt dangerous. The receptionist led me into a conference room overlooking downtown. Graham was already waiting. A stack of documents sat neatly on the table. He stood and shook my hand. "Mr. Rhodes." "Please," I said. "Call me Malcolm." He nodded. "Malcolm, have a seat." Something about his tone immediately caught my attention. He wasn't speaking to me like a man about to lose everything. He was speaking to me like someone who had discovered something important. I sat down. Graham opened a folder. Inside was a copy of the prenup Janelle and I had signed years ago. I stared at it. The same document I hadn't thought about in nearly a decade. The same document I'd signed without reading carefully. The same document everyone had forgotten, including me. Graham adjusted his glasses. "Do you remember this clause?" He turned the page toward me. I scanned the paragraph, then read it again, then a third time. My heartbeat gradually accelerated. "Wait." Graham nodded. "Exactly." I looked up. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's real." I lowered my eyes back to the page. The wording was complicated, dense, filled with legal language, but the meaning was becoming painfully clear. The clause specifically addressed extraordinary wealth acquired during marriage, lottery winnings, unexpected inheritances, massive financial windfalls, and more importantly, it addressed abandonment, humiliation, public degradation, financial coercion, marital misconduct. If those actions occurred and were properly documented, a compensation formula automatically activated. I blinked several times, trying to process what I was reading. How did nobody notice this? Graham smiled slightly. Because nobody expected it to matter. A nervous laugh escaped me. Neither did I. Most people don't. He folded his hands. But your situation is very unusual. I stared at him. Are you telling me this clause applies to Janelle? Based on everything you've told me so far, he slid another document across the table. I believe it absolutely does. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since leaving the mansion. Possibility. Not revenge. Not greed. Possibility. Graham spent the next hour explaining the details. The clause wasn't automatic. It required evidence. Substantial evidence. Proof that abandonment and humiliation had occurred. Proof that the separation wasn't mutual. Proof that Janelle and her family intentionally degraded me. When he finished, I leaned back. Do you really think we can prove that? His answer came instantly. Let's find out. The investigation began immediately, and what we discovered shocked even me. The first breakthrough came from social media. Several relatives had posted videos from the day I was thrown out. Apparently, they found the entire situation amusing. One video showed Harold pointing directly at me. Another captured Trevor laughing. Another recorded me standing beside my suitcase while relatives watched. The footage made my stomach turn. But legally, it was valuable. Very valuable. Then things got worse for Janelle. Much worse. One of her cousins contacted Graham's office. Privately. Confidentially. She admitted she felt guilty. What happened that afternoon had bothered her for months. She agreed to provide a statement. Then another relative came forward. Then another. And another. Suddenly, people who had remained silent were talking. The picture became clearer. Harold had orchestrated much of the confrontation. Trevor had encouraged it. And according to multiple witnesses, Janelle had known about the plan beforehand. That revelation hit me harder than anything else, because until then part of me still believed she had been pressured, manipulated, influenced. Now I was learning she had participated willingly. That truth hurt, far more than the legal battle itself. Weeks later, Janelle officially filed for divorce. The paperwork arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I stared at the envelope for nearly 10 minutes before opening it. Somehow seeing everything in writing made it feel final. Years of marriage reduced to signatures and legal terminology. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Perhaps because I had already lost her. The divorce documents were merely catching up to reality. Meanwhile, Janelle remained completely confident. According to mutual acquaintances, she believed the outcome was obvious. She had $150 million. The mansion. The investment. The influence. The attorneys. From her perspective, the case was already over. Harold apparently agreed. One witness later testified that he openly bragged during a family gathering. Malcolm doesn't stand a chance. Those words would age poorly. Very poorly. As court preparations continued, Graham remained careful, methodical, professional. He never guaranteed victory, never made dramatic promises, never exaggerated our chances. But every time new evidence arrived, his confidence grew. Eventually he assembled everything into a massive case file. Videos, witness statements, text messages, emails, financial records, timeline evidence, documentation of public humiliation, documentation of abandonment, documentation of coercive behavior. The stack became enormous. Karma. One evening, after reviewing everything, Graham looked across his desk. Malcolm. Yeah? I think they made a serious mistake. I swallowed. How serious? He paused, then said quietly, potentially $50 million serious. For several seconds I couldn't speak. The number felt absurd. Impossible. Life-changing. I wasn't thinking about luxury cars, or mansions, or private jets. I was thinking about security. Freedom. Opportunity. A future that nobody could take away. Still, nothing was guaranteed. Everything depended on the judge. Everything depended on the final ruling. And finally, after months of preparation, the day arrived. The courtroom was packed. Attorneys, observers, family members, reporters, curious spectators. Everyone seemed aware that something unusual was about to happen. Janelle sat at her table wearing an expensive designer suit. Her confidence was obvious. Harold looked equally relaxed. Trevor appeared almost bored. They looked like people expecting victory. I sat beside Graham, quiet, focused, trying not to let my emotions take control. Hours passed. Arguments were presented. Evidence was reviewed. Witnesses testified. Videos were played. The atmosphere shifted noticeably as more details emerged. The confidence on Janelle's side slowly began to crack. Harold stopped smiling. Trevor stopped looking bored. And for the first time, I saw genuine concern on Janelle's face. By late afternoon, the courtroom had become completely silent. Judge Celeste Harrington reviewed the final documents. Then she removed her glasses. The room froze. Everyone knew what was coming. My pulse pounded inside my chest. Across the room, Janelle stared forward without blinking. Harold's jaw tightened. Trevor shifted nervously in his seat. Judge Harrington opened the final ruling, looked down at the pages, and began to speak. The courtroom was so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning system. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Judge Celeste Harrington looked down at the ruling one final time before lifting her eyes toward the courtroom. Every person present knew this moment would change lives, including mine. My hands were clenched tightly beneath the table. Across the room, Janelle sat perfectly still. Harold's confidence had vanished. Trevor looked pale. For the first time since this nightmare began, none of them appeared certain of the outcome. Judge Harrington began speaking. The court finds that prenuptial agreement signed by both parties is valid and enforceable. A ripple moved through the room. My pulse quickened. The judge continued. The evidence presented establishes a documented pattern of public humiliation, abandonment, and intentional degradation directed toward Mr. Rhodes. Harold lowered his head. Janelle stared at the table. The judge continued reading. The compensation clause outlined within Section 9 of the agreement therefore becomes active. A silence followed. The kind of silence that feels heavy, permanent. Life-changing. Then came the sentence that nobody on Janelle's side expected to hear. The court awards Malcolm Rhodes compensation in accordance with the contractual formula established within the prenuptial agreement. I heard someone gasp. Another person whispered. Several reporters immediately began writing notes. Judge Harrington looked directly at the documents before concluding. The awarded amount shall be $50 million. The room froze. Completely. Utterly frozen. Harold's face lost all color. Trevor looked as though someone had physically struck him. Janelle closed her eyes. For a moment nobody reacted, because the number sounded unreal. $50 million. The same family that had thrown me out like garbage had just watched the very document they ignored hand me a fortune. Yet strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. I felt relieved. Relieved that the truth had mattered. Relieved that dignity had mattered. Relieved that actions still carried consequences. As people slowly began leaving the courtroom, Graham shook my hand. Congratulations. I smiled. Thank you. You earned this. I looked across the room toward Janelle. No, I said quietly. They earned it. Graham understood exactly what I meant. Over the following months, my life changed dramatically, but not in the way people expected. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't purchase a private jet. I didn't start posting luxury photos online. In fact, one of the first things I did was disappear. For nearly 6 months, I traveled, thought, reflected, healed. Because money can solve many problems, but it cannot repair a broken heart. That work had to come from me. When I finally returned, I built a plan. Not for wealth, for purpose. I invested carefully, partnered with experienced professionals, created businesses, supported local entrepreneurs, funded scholarship programs for students who came from backgrounds similar to mine, young people with dreams but limited opportunities, people who simply needed someone to believe in them. Years passed. Slowly, my companies grew, then expanded again. The income became substantial, the respect became genuine, most importantly the peace became real. For the first time in years I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Not Harold, not Trevor, not society, not even myself. I simply enjoyed my life. One autumn afternoon, nearly 5 years after the divorce, I attended a charity event benefiting education initiatives. The ballroom overlooked the waterfront. Soft music filled the air. Guests moved between tables. Conversations echoed throughout the room. I had just finished speaking with several donors when I noticed a familiar face. Janelle. For a moment, neither of us moved. Time seemed to pause. She looked different. Older, not physically, emotionally. Life had clearly taught her lessons too. She approached slowly. When she reached me, she smiled. A genuine smile. Not forced. Not awkward. Real. Malcolm. Janelle. For a brief moment, we simply stood there. Two people who had once planned an entire future together. Finally, she spoke. I wanted to congratulate you. I nodded. Thank you. She glanced around the ballroom. I've been following what you've built. Her eyes settled back on mine. The scholarships. The businesses. The community projects. I smiled. It's been meaningful. She nodded. You should be proud. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I never expected. I spent a long time blaming everyone else for what happened. I remained silent, but eventually I had to be honest with myself. She looked down briefly, then back at me. I made choices. There was sadness in her voice, but there was also accountability, something that hadn't existed years earlier. I hurt someone who loved me. I didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing left to argue about, nothing left to win, nothing left to lose. Finally, I said, I hope you're doing okay. A small smile appeared. I am. And surprisingly, I believed her. We spoke for a few more minutes. Then the evening pulled us in different directions. As she walked away, I felt something unexpected. Not bitterness, not regret. Closure. Real closure. The kind that arrives when you finally stop carrying the weight of the past. That night, standing near the ballroom windows overlooking the city lights, I reflected on everything that had happened. The lottery, the betrayal, the mansion, the suitcase, the courtroom, the $50 million. People often believe money changes people. I don't think that's true anymore. Money simply removes the masks. It reveals what was already hiding underneath. Character survives both poverty and wealth. Ego does not. And the greatest victory in my story was never the $50 million. It was becoming the kind of man who didn't need revenge to feel successful. Because in the end, peace is worth far more than money, and no amount of wealth can ever compete with the freedom of knowing exactly who you are. Significant and educational value. This story teaches that wealth does not create character, reveals it. Malcolm's greatest victory was not the $50 million he received, but the dignity he preserved when he was betrayed, humiliated, and abandoned.